and welcome back to another Tempo Storm Meta Snapshot breakdown. The recent balance patch changed some things up quite heavily and finally brought the meta to a new horizon. Despite Ashes of Outland starting off relatively rough for most, with the dominance of Illidan, the meta finally seems to be in a much healthier place. The recent balance patch hit quite a few cards, with several different classes and archetypes being touched upon, and seeing a decrease in power. While it's still early in the new meta's life, there is an established meta with different decks finding themselves sitting on the top and others struggling to keep competing. Is Warrior still sitting at the top of the meta? Will Demon Hunter be out of Tier 1 for the first time since its release? Join us as we answer these questions and more in this Meta Snapshot breakdown. Before we jump in, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to turn notifications on to be kept up to date with all of our strategy game content. As always, check out the rest of the meta report over at tempostorm.com for a more in-depth analysis on all your favorite decks. Now let's jump right in. Leading off Tier 1 in this Meta Snapshot is Tempo Warrior, to the surprise of literally nobody. Warrior has consistently been the best deck in the meta, and once you have a few games under your belt with the archetype, you should be able to handle most matchups. The nerfs didn't really hit this archetype that much, and it continues to dominate the ladder. While some matchups can be relatively difficult to pilot, a perfect player will navigate them to a win more often than not. It's important to remember that this is a ladder tier list though, so all of our matchups are with average players in mind and will account for errors. As such, Tempo Warrior has a really solid matchup against the recently nerfed Tempo Demon Hunter, as well as Quest Warlock. Against Demon Hunter, you can stave off their pressure while looking to close out the game with pressure or armor, and against Quest Warlock, you have the option to OTK them with chargers, or to simply out-armor their burst. As for bad matchups, Tempo Warrior tends to have a rough time against Galakron Priest. Prior to the nerf, this matchup was pretty rough unless you played absolutely perfectly, and following the nerfs, even perfect play might not be enough. Priest can easily take the game to fatigue, or can even out-pressure you with a few minions and an apotheosis or two. The second deck in Tier 1 might be a bit more surprising to people, as it was struggling prior to the nerfs. Highlander Hunter makes its debut into Tier 1, and is performing surprisingly well on ladder. While it took a minor hit with the nerf to Dragon Queen Alexstrasza, the deck still continues to perform very well. The rest of the deck is consistent and powerful enough that a nerf to a 9-mana card didn't really hinder the archetype's success. In fact, some players in the recent Masters Tour even chose to cut Dragon Queen for some interesting cards. Highlander Hunter is a good choice for ladder, so don't hesitate to give it a shot if you're fed up of playing Warrior. This Hunter archetype has a really good matchup against Quest Warlock and Galakron Priest, as the deck has a slew of different early game threats, as well as some evasive minions, making it hard for the control decks to interact with these threats. As for bad matchups, Highlander Hunter has historically struggled with more aggressive decks, making Tempo Demon Hunter the only bad matchup for it at the highest echelons of the tier list. Tier 1 is smaller this time around, as there is a pretty noticeable difference between the top decks and the ones in the second tier. Of course, Tier 2 decks are still solid choices for ladder, so don't hesitate to pick them up if you're looking to climb. Leading off Tier 2 this time around is the previously mentioned Quest Warlock. This deck really stood to lose nothing from the latest balance patch, as Dragon Queen Alexstrasza was the only card it ran that was lowered in power level. Pretty often you're playing it for 0 mana anyway, making the change hardly noticeable at times. Quest Warlock is arguably the only viable combo deck that exists right now, so be sure to play it if you're chasing the high that Freeze Mage once brought. Quest Warlock typically will aim to stall out early turns of the game until it can look to close the game out with Burst or Malagos, or by pressuring using dragons from Alexstrasza. Quest Warlock has an insanely favored matchup against both controlled Demon Hunter and Galakron Priest, with both matchups feeling nearly unlosable. Seriously, if you queue this from the Demon Hunter or the Priest side, just concede and start another game. You'll save yourself some time. As for bad matchups, Quest Warlock has a rough time against Highlander Hunter, as we mentioned before. This matchup seriously sucks and requires you to draw very well to win. The second deck we'll be looking at today in Tier 2 is Tempo Demon Hunter. While this deck did fall from grace slightly, it's still a solid choice for ladder. It's quite insane to think about how many nerfs the archetype had just for it to end up near the top of Tier 2, but it is what it is, and finally we might see a bit less Demon Hunter on the ladder. Tempo Demon Hunter is still a solid choice, although players are struggling to convene on what list they think is better. Some players have taken to cutting Warglaves of Azzinoth following its nerf, while others have started to run it alongside Mana Saber in order to curve out more consistently. Tempo Demon Hunter has a good matchup against some of the slower decks on ladder, such as Quest Warlock or Galakron Priest. Despite the nerfs, you can still curve and pressure well, making it good against these archetypes. As for bad matchups, Control Demon Hunter is one that's nearly unwinnable. Seriously. This is actually the worst matchup on the tier list, even worse than Galakron Galakrond Priest matchups. This is on the same level that Freeze Mage was against Control Warrior back in the day. If you find yourself frequently running into Control Demon Hunter, just switch decks. The last deck that we'll be looking at today in Tier 2 is Galakrond Priest. This archetype wasn't touched at all in the balance changes, but was hurt quite a bit thanks to the rise of some of its bad matchups. Luckily for Anduin, Warrior still leads the meta, leaving Anduin to maintain this favored matchup. As for bad matchups, Galakrond Priest has a really rough time against Quest Warlock and Highlander Hunter, with once again nearly unwinnable matchups. There really are some polarized matchups in this meta, huh? Countering the meta can be very difficult at times, as you not only have to have a proper read on the meta, but there also needs to be a deck that can actually bully the top meta decks. Luckily for you all, we have just the deck for you. This time around, we're suggesting that you pick up Bomb Control Warrior. This archetype might have a rough time against Tempo Warrior, but it can really bully some of the draw-oriented decks and even turns off Highlander synergies. Bomb Control Warrior might be similar to Tempo Warrior, but opposed to playing for, well, tempo, you're playing to control the game state and close it out with Blastmaster Boom and bombs. Control Bomb Warrior is a solid choice for ladder if you're running into a lot of Highlander decks, such as Hunter or Quest Warlock, as we mentioned before, but can be bad if you see a lot of Tempo Warrior and Galakrond Control Priest. Make sure to make a read on the meta by paying attention to what you're queuing into, and if it seems like this deck fits your local meta, give it a shot and let us know how it does in the comments below. The meta has finally changed, and we've been freed from the grasp of Illidan. While we weren't prepared originally, it seems after a few months we finally are. Warrior still has control over the meta, and likely will until the new expansion, Scholomance Academy, hits in early August. Speaking of the new expansion, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel over here at Tempo Strategy, as we'll be releasing a load of content pertaining to the new set in the coming weeks. Don't forget to turn notifications on to be kept up to date with all of our strategy game content, and as always, we'll see you next time.